Hey there, we're the Westlaw Pirates and welcome to the show. We're here to share our thoughts on Northwestern athletics and college sports with thoughts and analysis from the visceral to the statistical. We run our tailgate with the red pirate flag flying high above as we give no quarter, especially the fourth. I'm Sam Walter.
I'm John Lacombe.
And I'm Eric Skoskouspo.
Well, guys, welcome back. We had a little bit of a break coming off of last spring season, and I don't know about you guys, but we bought our season tickets for the stadium on the lake. We all looked at sticker shock at the price of the Wrigley tickets.
I mean, we all looked at sticker shock at the price of the Lakeside tickets too. But
fair, yeah, that's true. That's true.
Hey, yeah, we're in the north end zone. I'm already thinking about finding some North Remembers banner that we can hang for Miami of Ohio / Duke. Something like that. But yeah, it's going to be fun. I mean, the idea of north stands, right? I mean, is pretty funny. There haven't been north stands since, and you got to go a long way back. So
winter is coming has some
coming.
Relevance on the lakefront too.
Exactly.
It's true, but don't besmirch Walker Terrace.
True.
Those were north stands.
True.
And the makeshift ones that you occasionally got wide right field goals going into.
Right. And I think if you go back far enough in the Dyke Stadium history, there actually were north stands. But we were squared away. I think like a lot of you, we were probably waiting for our window with bated breath, etc. And obviously we are well aware that some of you did not get the seats that you want or are still sorting that out. And I'm sure Northwestern on their end is still sorting it all out too. So it's all still a work in progress. But yeah, we had our break. We handled that little business during our break. And then all the other business we've been handling during the break relative to this pod has been 17 Big Ten previews that we have to knock out.
Let's go.
No,
have to. I think
get to. Come on, yeah, exactly.
Get to, absolutely. It's just so funny when it was 12 or whatever else. The fact that we have 10 in the name of our conference, but now doing 17 of them in the Big Ten is pretty hilarious. But it's been fun. Absolutely right.
Yeah. So we're going to start, as we always do, start with our previews of the Big Ten teams that Northwestern does not play this year. And there's a lot of them this year because, like you said, it's an 18-team league. So, kind of dividing that up a little bit, we're going to get started with a look at the USC Trojans, a team that last year went 8-5, had the number one pick in the draft, who's now here in Chicago. And I mean, they're always thought of as blue bloods of the West Coast, right? They're always considered to be the cream of the crop, but the past few years they might not have been living up to their billing. So John, as we look at Pac-12 or former Pac-12 defenses, former Pac-12 teams here, it's got to be hard to figure out how to judge them and how to really kind of preview them. But what are we looking at from the Trojans D this year?
Well, I'm glad you phrased it that way because I think we'll benefit here as we get into all of these previews from the fact that you're all going to listen to this because it's USC. And that means everyone's going to tune in, everyone's going to download this pod right when it comes in, which gives us an ability to kind of use this as a kickoff to talk about something that you just alluded to, which is when it comes to all of these Pac-12 teams that are coming in, we don't have the benefit of what we've had, which is 13 years of doing these previews and seeing the ins and outs of these teams and the way these things cycle, the way it flows, the way a team can build momentum or build culture or lose that culture on either side of the ball over the time. And we haven't built that experience with these teams. So we kind of had to go back and put it together as best as we can. And what I did from a defensive perspective was basically look at the last decade of defensive performance among the four teams who are coming in and make that my starting point for sorting it out. So chances are there's a good chance that even though a lot of you follow college football, you're obviously very aware of USC, and you're maybe aware of some of their recent defensive performance, particularly some of their recent defensive struggles. If you look at the past decade and you're looking for a barometer, if you haven't been following USC for the past decade, The Ohio State defense is a good place to start. That will help you put this thing together. If you've listened to the way we've talked about Ohio State over the past decade, there are a lot of similarities here. But if we're talking about USC, let's divide it into two stretches, okay? You take these last 10 years, divide it into two halves. The half in and around Lincoln Riley, the recent half, and then the 5 years before that. So if we ignore this god-awful mess that has been the recent USC defense and we zoom back to 2014 through 2018, we see a very respectable defense that in any given year was roughly fifth best in the conference. And here is where you should stop and go, fifth, they're US effing C. And I say, yes, you're absolutely right. This team rolls out of bed with 4- and 5-star guys at every position. So like I said, this is the West Coast version of the Buckeye School of defensive underperformance. And I can't stress enough, 2014 through 2018 was the good years of the last decade, because I don't know if you're familiar with this recent defensive dumpster fire going on in Trojan country, but USC's basically been the 11th best defense in the Pac-12 during the past 3-year stretch. It's been a nightmare. But you know who else has been very much a defensive nightmare for the past decade in the Pac-12 defensively? UCLA, which matters, and we're going to drill down on this when we get to UCLA in these previews, but not last year. Because for 1 year, DeAnton Lynn was there as their DC, and suddenly UCLA had a god defense. And then USC, with its perennial collection of defensive riches, went and used some real riches and pulled this guy across town and hired him as their DC. And they might have a dude who can actually get value out of all of these 4- and 5-star guys. And this is a specific piece that all of you Northwestern fans, at some point you were made aware of this piece of information, and you may have forgotten it, or you maybe have not forgotten it. But do you know who DeAnton Lynn went and grabbed as his linebackers coach? Either of you guys remember?
Yeah.
Matt Entz.
Yep, North Dakota.
From North Dakota State.
Yep, that's right.
Who was David Braun's head coach when they were stacking natties up at NDSU. So you look, DeAnton Lynn's clearly an awesome defensive coordinator, and he immediately started grabbing awesome position coaches. And it really is looking like USC improved its defensive coaching by a factor of 10 heading into this year. If you look at some of the chatter around this team, though, you'll see it's very cautious. If anything, it's glass half empty, and it's talking about how the defense could potentially improve. And this is that thing, and again, much later in the summer, we're going to talk about Ohio State and the way this kind of thing can be possible. But this defense should be awesome. Just go to Rivals and friggin' scroll through the recruiting classes. They're stacked with talent. And that's not even including the portal, because the Trojans, it's just an attractive place. The guys want to transfer Caleb Williams. But defensively, like the year before last, they pulled in Bear Alexander, who was the number 1 defensive tackle in the portal by far. That was a guy we were dreaming about once upon a time. So then, like, it's funny because I remember when we were dreaming about Bear Alexander, because we were like, thought that our defensive line was going to be a mess this past year. And then it wasn't. It improved by leaps and bounds, which reinforces this key point. When coaching suddenly gets a lot better, performance can suddenly get a lot better. And, you know, again, if Lincoln Riley just gets the hell out of the way and lets Lynn perform, I think USC should become a major defensive player in the Big Ten. Or at the very least, I think they maybe can rise back up to the general level that Ohio State churns out every year.
If you or a loved one is seriously injured by someone else's negligence, hire Kent Simpson of the Simpson Law Group. After over a decade prosecuting murder cases in Chicago, Simpson opened his own firm focused on wrongful death and personal injury cases. He specializes in car, truck, motorcycle, boat, and other transportation accidents, as well as construction accidents, medical negligence, slip and falls, product liability, and more. Millions recovered for clients, no fee unless he wins. The Simpson Law Group. Compassion, empathy, and vigorous advocacy. Go to simpsonlawgroup.com or call 312-332-2107 for a free consultation, and go Cats. So, I mean, you think about Lincoln Riley. He is like the offensive wunderkind, or at least that's what he's been billed as, and he definitely has been in the past. It's easy to be a wonderkind when you've got Caleb Williams, who you've got a Heisman Trophy quarterback. Caleb Williams is no longer there, but Scuzz, it's got to be just restocking the shelf for them, right?
I mean, yes and no. I think the last 2 years, I guess to borrow John's analogy of Ohio State, right? The last 2 years is really the first time in maybe since Lane Kiffin that USC's offense looked as good as Ohio State's offense has looked for the better part of 2 decades. They were around like 26, 32 points per game in the 5 years before Lincoln Riley arrived. And it wasn't until 2022, when Caleb Williams won the Heisman Trophy, that they jumped up to 40-plus points per game. And let's remember, much like on defense, this is a team that generally boasts one of the top 2 quarterbacks in a recruiting class at any given time. They probably have 2 or 3 of those guys, or I'll say 2 of those guys cycling through their roster at any given time. They've got 5-star running backs, 5-star receivers. They're always putting offensive linemen in the NFL. This has never, ever been a talent problem. It's never been a player's problem. They have everything that they need to be the type of dynamite offense that you've seen from Ohio State, from Alabama, from what Georgia has started to do now. Like, frankly, USC should be scoring 40 points a game going back every year as long as you can figure it out. And they haven't been that. So on one hand, Lincoln Riley finally got them there. On the other hand, it was very much driven by Caleb Williams. And now entering the post-Caleb Williams era, while there are some names in the room, etc., and while Lincoln Riley has an extremely good track record following up one great QB with another great QB, it's a bit of an unknown. We're entering an unknown time here. So to dig in a little bit, I think the quarterback's going to be, whoever plays is probably going to be good. It's most likely Miller Moss at this standpoint. He's the one who played in the bowl game and looked like an absolute stud. They do get an interesting transfer in Jaden Maeva from UNLV. He picked USC over Georgia, interestingly, for his transfer destination. But, 41-plus points per game, a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback who then didn't beat but came pretty close to matching his numbers in the second season after winning his trophy. Like, I just think it's going to be a really hard bar for these guys to meet. On top of the change at QB, they turn over almost all their pass catchers, and they're likely going to be playing 2 new running backs as well. One, Jaquavius Marks, who's a really talented, experienced back coming from Mississippi State, but they're always talented. Like I said, 4 and 5-star all over the place, but it's very unproven. The biggest upside for them is their offensive line, which is going to be the relative strength of this team. They did give up 30-plus sacks each of the last 2 years, which is pretty concerning, but Williams was also really notable for holding the ball too long, for trying to extend plays too long, etc. They do have 3 returning starters, a ton of depth. Like, that's where they're going to try to build from. I think there's going to be a huge test for this team, though, coming into the Big Ten. They will be playing physical defenses week in and week out. Utah, which is the Pac-12's most physical team, in my opinion, has been USC's bugaboo for years. They won the last 4 matchups and 6 of the last 9 against the Trojans. When you add in losses last year to Notre Dame and Oregon, it really plays into that trope of USC struggling against tough physical defense. You can even go back to Lincoln Riley's time at Oklahoma. The stigma holds. And as a result, USC's offensive line is going to undergo great scrutiny with all the defensive lines that they're going to face in the Big Ten. In addition to playing Notre Dame again, they will face Michigan, Penn State, Wisconsin, and LSU. And I think Nebraska and Minnesota should present probably more resistance in the trenches than the average Pac-12 squad. So this is going to be really interesting to watch. They have all the talent in the world. Their talent is probably on par with the very top of the rest of the conference. But that talent is super green. And then they've got a coach who, like you said, Sam, he's the offensive wonderkind, the guru. He's been, bombs away, points on tops of points everywhere he's ever gone. But the electricity and the ease at which he has reloaded, he's lived in the defense optional Big 12 and Pac-12 for years, and this is a different animal now. And let me be clear, I don't think USC is going to fall flat on their face, but I cannot see them matching the production of the last 2 years, and it's going to be really interesting, especially given, John, what you said on the other side of the ball, how that comes together and what they actually can do from a record standpoint this year.
Have you ever thought about building a Westlaw Pirates-like community for your business? If so, we've got your solution. Teamworks Media, a brand marketing and content company, is here to help you tell your brand story better. Better yet, you can work directly with the founder, Jay Sharman, known on this podcast as Like the Posts. The same expertise he's brought to brands like ESPN, the Big Ten Conference, and Northwestern University are now available to you in an affordable way, directly with this Wildcat superfan. Contact Jay directly at 312-446-9435 or jay@teamworksmedia.com to learn how to elevate your brand story. So you mentioned some of their opponents. Let's run through their schedule here real quick. They opened the season against LSU in Vegas. Then they are home against Utah State, and then they have an early bye week. They travel to Michigan on September 21st. Then they're home for Wisconsin, at Minnesota on October 5th, home for Penn State, at Maryland on October 19th, home for Rutgers, at Washington, another bye week, Nebraska at home, at UCLA, and Notre Dame at home. I mentioned the dates because looking at their schedule, it doesn't appear to have any real cold weather cross-country trips. They go to Maryland on October 19th, and that's it. I mean, they're at Washington in the beginning of November. And yeah, sure, Seattle in November is its own thing, but they're used to that.
I had not noticed that. That's really interesting.
You're right. They won't see cold weather. October 5th at Minnesota.
October 5th at Minnesota, October 19th at Maryland, maybe.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That's super interesting. It's a big favorable piece.
I've seen a lot of snow in Minnesota in October, but never by October 5th.
Yeah. They are truly fascinating to me because you guys made a great point that can you really argue that it can get better than having those two Caleb Williams seasons under center? And I'm sure USC people will be like, oh, hell yes. We've had deeper offenses before. And it's yeah, I know, but you're stacked with talent and that guy pushing the buttons. But on the flip side, I can't really undersell how bad this defense has been for the past 3 years. And again, not cart before the horse, but the perennial signal, the perennial flag bearer for defensive mediocrity relative to talent in this conference is Ohio State, and they're a defense majorly on the upswing. Because when you have that much friggin' talent, and then you suddenly put a great coach. So again, I don't know how long it'll take D'Anton Lynn. There's definitely a scenario where it's he doesn't get the defense squared away in year one. Their offense drops off. And then it's not hard to go LSU, Michigan, Penn State, Washington, Notre Dame, and their rival, right? That's 6 difficult games. A tough Nebraska team. Those are for sure. Those are all potential problems. Then there's the flip side where as Scuzz said, they still have boatloads of talent on offense. They have boatloads of talent on defense. They get the defense squared away. And then it's we all know the best teams on their schedule, Michigan, Penn State, those are teams that are undergoing major shifts, right? In coaches and talent. They're good football teams, but good football teams going through a lot. So, I mean, there's certainly...
But that stretch you just identified, because Sam, as you were going through it, that was the stretch that stood out to me. At Michigan, Wisconsin, at Minnesota, Penn State. And yeah, there's a lot of upheaval in all 4 of those places. But those are 4 physical football teams. And USC is going to finish that stretch battered.
Yeah.
And they might finish that stretch 4-0, and
right.
they might not. And then, Maryland, Rutgers is sneaky good, and then Washington, that is a September 21st to November 2nd is going to be a fascinating ride for the Trojans.
And you talk about ride because something else that jumped out at me is they do not have back-to-back home games at all in those. They're traveling there and back, there and back, there and back. They're putting a lot of miles on. Now, who knows if that's an effect, if that has any effect on them, but, it is definitely something to note.
I would say in short, do I think USC can win 10 games here? For sure. 9 games probably seems more reasonable to me. On the flip side, Nebraska could not be sitting in a better spot here. Let down look ahead. That's a dangerous Nebraska team that is going to catch USC in between 2 games USC really cares about. And really 3, because after UCLA is the Notre Dame game. And at the same, and like Rutgers, week before they go to Seattle, those are 2 teams you can't sleep on this year, and it's exactly the kind of massive upset one of those teams would want to welcome USC to the conference with. But again, I think I settle somewhere around 9, maybe 10 for this team, just because.
What's the floor though?
6, but I don't that to me would be radioactive. I'm not saying I think that could happen. I can find you 6 losses here easily.
They were 8-5 last year. So you think they're a better team this year in a harder conference?
Again, they've had the 11th best defense in that conference for 3 straight years, and with a bunch of talent, and now they have a great coach. So, if that defense steps up to mid-grade, but maybe they won't. Maybe they can't get there quick enough. But it's not hard to be LSU, Michigan, Penn State, Washington, Notre Dame, and then their rival. That's 6 right there. Not even counting Nebraska or a Rutgers, So, there are 6 losses to find, but I think, especially given that we don't have the history with USC, I very much want to respect the US effing C piece of this and be I know that they are one of the juggernauts of college football.
Well, and that defense is the reason. They were 8-5 this past year, like you mentioned, 11-3 in Caleb's Heisman year the year before, but then 4-8 in 21, 8-5 in 19. There were,
it hasn't
the
been
Clay
good.
Helton years.
Their defense has been just bad for 5 years. Horrific for 3, bad for 5. It hasn't been a good defense.
And the offense wasn't great back then either. So I feel like USC post Pete Carroll and then post kind of the brief flash that was Kiffin before it fell off the truck. They've been very mediocre for who they are and the type of talent they have. And I do think Riley is a different animal from the other guys that have been there since Pete Carroll, but a down year coming off of Caleb Williams while they figure things out again in a really different environment they've been in with a pretty tough schedule compared to last year is it's really interesting.
It's really not hard to see a scenario where they're 1-2 after 3 games, and then certainly 3-3 after 6 games, right? It doesn't take much. Losing to LSU, Michigan, and Penn State that's not difficult. And only of those 3 games, only one is a true home game. So, Again, I guess I still come around 8 or 9. I just think their defense is going to get a bunch better, and that's going to really help cancel what they're losing on the other side of the ball.
Yeah, that could really pay dividends against Washington, Nebraska, and Notre Dame at the back end of the schedule.
Anything else to mention on the Trojans?
For Cats fans, prepare yourself. If you weren't around in 1995 and you didn't watch the Rose Bowl, this team's really annoying to watch, at least sonically, because
how many songs do they know?
One. It's the only song they know, and they play it over and over and over again. It's and it's not as catchy as Rocky Top, and it's a lot shorter, so they can play it after every play. It sucks.
Would you say that is the only song they know, and they play it real loud and they play it real slow?
Yeah, pretty much. Gird yourselves,
Why?
folks.
Why, John? Come on.
Luckily, we don't have to play them this year, but at some point we will, and it just like pack some headphones, y'all.
So with that, we'll go ahead and leave it there for tonight. Head to our website, westlawpirates.com, where you can leave comments and questions. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And email the show, westlawpirates@gmail.com. Tune in next time as we give our visceral and statistical views on Northwestern athletics, and look for us in the west lot of Ryan Field flying the red pirate flag, because we give no quarter, especially the fourth. For John Lacombe and Eric Scasbo and Sam Walter, thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.